Do you consider yourself an adventurous person who loves to seek out new thrills? If you are, you won't want to miss this video. In fact, if you're interested in all things weird and unusual, you should definitely stick around. Get your mind ready as we take a look at the most harrowing survival stories that will give you chills. In 1985, mountaineers Joe Simpson and Simon Yates decided to tackle the previously unclimbed West Face. They embarked on their journey up the Ciula Grande, a 21,000-foot mountain in the Peruvian Andes. Their climb began without incident and everything was going as planned. However, their trip soon changed when snowstorms moved in. In order to navigate the mountain's crevices, the men decided to rope themselves together. After a series of calamities, the unthinkable happened. Joe fell from an ice cliff, breaking his leg. This is when they realized that they couldn't continue climbing. Simon decided to lower Joe down the mountain, and once Joe had anchored himself, he could climb down. Simon tried his best to lower him to safety, successfully clearing 3,000 feet. But as storm conditions worsened, the pair became stuck, with Simon in danger of being pulled from the cliff. To make matters worse, a snowstorm had hit, and Joe was left dangling mid-air. In order to survive, Simon had to make an extremely difficult decision. He had to cut the rope. Simon cutting the rope meant that Joe would fall. Simon was unable to see or communicate with Joe, and it was presumed that Joe had died. Miraculously, Joe landed in one of the mountain's crevices and was able to use the remains of the rope to lower himself down the mountain and make it back to safety. Although both men survived the agonizing ordeal, several people were not happy with the way it was handled. They criticized Simon for cutting the rope and leaving his partner for dead in those conditions. However, Joe commended Simon for staying with him even though he was injured, and admitted that he too would have cut the rope if he were in Simon's position. In March 2003, professional ice hockey player Eric Lemarque set out for a day of snowboarding in the Sierra Nevada mountains. He had no idea that by the end of the night, he would be lost and moving farther away from safety by the minute. While snowboarding, Eric had veered off course along the 11,000-foot Mammoth Mountain. His trip to the mountains was primarily recreational, so he did not bring much supplies with him. However, he did have his MP3 player with him. And no, he didn't pull out his MP3 player and start listening to music to calm himself down. He did something much smarter. As he stood there in the freezing cold, with no idea where he was, he suddenly remembered a scene from a movie. In the movie, they used the radio signal from a device they had as a compass. This is exactly what Eric did with his MP3 player, but this ordeal wasn't over just yet. Eric would end up being on Mammoth Mountain for 7 days, trying to find his way back. He faced frigid temperatures, and after falling into rushing water, he almost careened down an 80-foot waterfall. His snowboard and his clothes were pretty much all he had with him. He survived on a diet of pine nuts, tree bark, and bubble gum, and slept on pine branches to keep dry. During this horrible ordeal, Eric made a terrifying realization: that he would probably lose his feet. He tried his best to protect his feet and keep them as warm as possible, but he was unsuccessful. According to Eric, he couldn't get a boot on, and he was walking in the snow with one foot in a boot with no socks on either foot. His feet even turned red and purple and were ice cold. Eric's 7-day nightmare up on the mountain left him malnourished, exhausted, and frostbitten, with tissue damage to his lower extremities. On his 8th day, As he contemplated death, a miracle would occur. He heard the sound of a helicopter above. He had just one thing working in his favor. The snowfall had been relatively light during his experience, which allowed rescuers to follow some of his tracks. When they found him, he was 44 pounds lighter and just hours away from death. As he had anticipated, both his feet and much of his legs had to be amputated. Despite the horror and agony he experienced, Eric said this ordeal brought him closer to his divorced parents and made him reevaluate his life. He even said this could be the greatest experience of his life. In February 2003, Aaron Ralston was backcountry skiing on Resolution Peak in central Colorado with two friends. The day was going fine until things suddenly took a turn for the worst. A piece of snow broke away from the slope and it started an avalanche. Aaron ended up getting stuck. He was buried up to his neck in snow and could not see a way out. Luckily, one of his friends dug him out, and together they rescued the third friend. Aaron would later admit that it was horrible and it should have killed us. An incident like this would have made most climbers take steps to be more careful, but Aaron did the opposite. He kept climbing and exploring hazardous terrains, and oftentimes he was completely on his own. Just a few months later, Aaron was hiking alone through Blue John Canyon in eastern Wayne County, Utah. At around 2:45 p.m., as he descended into the canyon, a giant rock above him slipped. The next thing he knew, his right arm was lodged between an 800-pound boulder and a canyon wall. Aaron was also trapped 100 feet below the desert surface and 20 miles away from the nearest paved road. To make matters worse, he hadn't told anyone about where he was going or what he was doing, and he didn't have any way to signal for help. He inventoried his provisions: 2 burritos, some candy bar crumbs, and a bottle of water. However, as time went on, he started running out of things to eat and drink. Eventually, he ran out of water and was even forced to drink his own urine. Aaron tried chipping away at the boulder, but it was of no use. Early on, he considered cutting off his arm. He experimented with tourniquets and made superficial cuts to test his knife's sharpness. That night, as he drifted in and out of consciousness, Aaron had a dream where he only had half his right arm and he was playing with a child. When he woke up, he believed that the dream was a sign that he would survive and he would have a family. This reignited his determination to get out of that canyon alive, and he threw himself into survival mode. Using the rotational force from his trapped arm, he managed to break his ulna and his radius. After his bones were disconnected, he created a makeshift tourniquet from the tubing of his Camelback water bottle and cut off his circulation entirely. Then, he was able to use a cheap, dull 2-inch knife to cut through his skin and muscle, and a pair of pliers to cut through his tendons. The entire process took an hour, during which Aaron lost 25% of his blood volume. High on adrenaline, he climbed out of the slot canyon, rappelled down a 65-foot sheer cliff, and hiked 6 of the 8 miles back to his car. He did all of this while dehydrated, losing blood, and one-handed. 6 miles into his hike, he met a family from the Netherlands who had been hiking in the canyon. They gave him Oreos and water and contacted the authorities. Aaron is truly a testament of bravery and survival. Since that incident, he went on to climb all of Colorado's peaks and is a motivational speaker. What are your thoughts on these amazing stories of survival? Let us know in the comments below. If you made it to the end of this video, that can only mean one thing. You are seriously into some weird-ish. So go ahead and press that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more weird content just like this.